to Eric Hansen were due today. So by probably next Monday, I anticipate we'll have that report of the ranked proposals from this year's ECAS work. I don't have anything else related toss out there that we haven't already said.
Yeah, we're done with the main part of that. That committee's work is just now getting those priorities established. All right. Calendar, you want to start with grade and reporting or school year?
Let's do grade and reporting since it's next year, right?
Yes. Grading reporting dates for next year coming around. Just like everything, having more eyes on the document is helpful. So if you, hopefully at this point, we're not noticing any more errors, but if you spot anything, let us know. We simply took our PD calendar that we looked at, it was 2 meetings ago, and put those into the document that stuck with the same kind of timelines in terms of grading reporting. I don't think we made any major changes to this. It was just taking what we've had in the past and putting it in the same format. Anything on that? All right, next thing is school calendar for 26-27. We've got some exciting changes coming from the calendar committee that were
Tuesday morning.
I think that was Tuesday morning.
Yeah. So we were trying to wrap up the 26-27 calendar. I think the last time we talked here about that, there was still some discussion about the half-day PD day in September, and then that PD day that comes right after Labor Day, or has the last couple of years. So kind of reached consensus on, again, with feedback, with dialogue and feedback from parents as well, as far as the half days. We did away with that half day on the Friday prior to Labor Day. And then moved the PD day that had been the Tuesday after Labor Day. We moved it back, and we looked at some different days in September. I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, it used to be corresponding date would have been around September 18th. We looked at that. There were some issues with the count day, because the count day September 20th falls on Sunday, that the count day will actually be the 21st, that Monday. But Shelley Gore said we obviously enroll a lot of kids sometimes the day before that count day on the 18th. If we didn't have school that day, that may prove problematic. And we looked at some other days, the 25th, that is count week for ELL. So that complicated things. So there's just a lot of student count issues in September. Some of the other feedback was too that we have a lot of professional learning right there in pre-service, and then we turn around and have another day pretty soon after that, but not much later on in the semester. So and it's also kind of a long haul between parent-teacher conferences and fall break there, Thanksgiving week there. So we moved that day to November 2nd, kind of break that up and give some PD time a little bit later and on in the semester also.
And one of the reasons that the suggestion was November 2nd rather than November 6th. November 2nd is a Monday rather than a Friday, is that as you all know, our early childhood educators have plan on Fridays. So we thought, well, maybe we try it on a Monday so that we have a PD day that doesn't interfere with our early childhood educators plan.
Two things that were kind of left hanging out. It actually helped even up the number of days and quarters too. Those closer to, so it's served us well on several different levels there.
And if we find that this timeline fits really well, it could benefit us in the future, because you'll notice November 2nd is kind of close to Halloween. We get lots of feedback about quality of instruction that happens around Halloween. Of course, Halloween is on a Saturday on the 26-27 school year, but if that timeline works, it's a potential that maybe we could address some of those concerns and be able to have our PD time that we need. So opens up some potential opportunities for the future.
Any other question about the 26, 27 calendar? Again, this one was much easier to work with Memorial Day falling on May 31st versus the 25th next year. That falls much better, yeah. All right.
I believe our last committee update is benefits.
We met this week, and Locke has provided for us kind of projections for next year. And so they, based on kind of claims experience and prescription costs and all of those things, we are projected to have an increase next year in the cost of our plan of about 9.6%. So that's about $5.5 million. And that is, of course, based on, again, claims and the direction that is all going, and then factoring in increases to drug costs and all of those kinds of things. So nonetheless, that will be something we'll have to figure out in some way, shape, or form. If we were to pass that along, just to give an idea, per employee per month, that'd be $121.11 increase that we would need to all incur to cover that increased costs.
That number again.
$121.11.
And that's per paycheck or per?
That is per month.
And that figure is based off of the 5.5 million. So then that includes the employer and the employee costs together, right?
This is what we as a district, this is what we have to come up with next year based on what they're projecting. So
Okay.
5.5 million has to be paid somewhere.
Right.
So
That
if
either
the district covers that, then the district would be incurring 5.5 million. If we were to pass that along and have that paid by all of us to cover that, it'd be 121.11. And that's approximate. I think I just kind of
It's an
used-
average.
yeah.
over the-
It's kind of in perspective, what has the percentage of increase been like in years past? Because nine.
Last year, I think we were 4.5 or 5.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
much lower last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
And our medical has been, the claims have gone up about 7%. The prescription is 12%. Prescription is what's really driving this.
So that is, where our broker is always looking and working with our PDM to kind of try and manage some of that, because we won't go into all of the complexities of prescription drugs. There are certain drugs that really drive the cost because they're very expensive. And so we kind of look at our formulary and looking at, are there other options that we could maybe move people to that would then decrease the cost and that kind of thing, but that would also not have, a negative impact and that kind of thing. So they made some of those adjustments even here in January or February, I want to say, to some of our really high cost drugs. And so they're hoping maybe some of that will start to be seen and bringing down some of that 12%. But unfortunately, there are some others that have now joined the top of the list that are even more costly. Yes, it's a continual struggle. So, in addition to going over that information and going over our claims dashboard, they also did some work in looking at weight loss drug cost analysis. That's something we've had ongoing discussions on, knowing that we've had, educators and staff interested in looking at is that something that our insurance could look at covering? And when we talk about these are those things you're seeing all of the commercials for. They GLP-1s is typically what they're called. And this gets a little complex as well because GLP-1s are used for diabetes. And so we have that is covered for under our in our insurance when they are needed for diabetes, but they are not covered for weight loss. And so they did take a look at what kind of projecting what it might cost the plan if we were to look at covering something, the GLP-1s for weight loss. And on the very, very conservative side, it would be an increase of our annual claims impact of about 2.3 million. And that's if only 20% of the people on our staff on our plan who they think would be eligible for a GLP-1 for weight loss. And they think that number, they started with 685 was kind of their rough estimate based on info block information we get, but that because we don't have any biometric screenings that we do as part of our plan, that's probably a really, really conservative number. And that 2.2 or almost 2.3 million I mentioned is if only 20% of those 685 tapped into and used the GLP-1. If half of those 685 did, it would be a almost $5.6 million increase, which is about $122 a month, similar to the $5.5 million that I shared earlier. So, you know, they continue to have lots of conversations and looking at, you know, are there on the horizon any other options and that kind of thing, because we know people have an interest, or is there other information even that we could provide to individuals on our plan to help with that cost, although it would be out of pocket. So they're going to kind of do a little more work and looking at some of those kinds of things as well. But it was helpful to have this information to get an idea of the impact of that. There are very few employers that cover this purely because of the sheer cost of it. They also provided some information in looking at bariatric surgery coverage. Of course, when you start talking about the GLP-1 piece, then you also think about, okay, what other kinds of options are out there? And of course, this is going to be a much more significant kind of step, if you will. But there is such a difference in the indicators and kind of the BMI and that kind of thing that you have to qualify for a GLP-1 versus bariatric surgery, that they estimated we would only have about 9 or 10 members on our plan that would be eligible for that. And of course, that comes with a cost as well that would have to be a spread across all of the members on our plan, which was fairly significant too.
That's the conservative weight loss drug of 2.3 million.
So it was helpful to have that information and spark some more conversation and that kind of thing as well. They also did gave us some information on Delta Dental and looking at that plan renewal. Of course, that's a voluntary benefit, but we will likely see an increase to our Delta plan cost as well, just because of the increased cost that we're incurring there. And that would be likely more so for the dental, just the base plan, and not so much the orthodontic plan.
That's about maybe a 5%, but
Yeah.
that could be a little bit of a moving target too.
Yes. Yeah. So, of course, the dental plan costs are a much more reasonable starting point. So those don't hurt as much when you look at it in terms of when you're looking at that benefit. So like, and looking at the monthly increase for employee only, it would be about a $2.06 increase. If you had your family, it'd be about a $5 increase. And then on the orthodontist side, about an $8 to $10 increase. So. And then they also gave us an update on our marketing efforts for an on-site clinic. And so we're still progressing in that process. We had the RFP had been out, we had all of those proposals come in. We spent a great deal of time kind of combing through and looking at all of those proposals and identifying vendors or finalists that we felt like had the most likely match to what we were kind of looking at. Some of the key things we looked at in that process were, of course, cost. But along with that was how many of their clients have our education or schools. I think that there's a lot of just nuances and unique things about a school district versus the corporate setting. And so kind of having that understanding was important to us. And so we have identified 3 finalists then that we'll be looking at doing interviews with in June. And then from there, likely narrowing down to 2, we believe, or see how things go there. But then likely doing some on-site visits to clinics that they have. We really also looked at those that have a local presence, and so, would have an understanding kind of our community as well. So it'll be interesting to see. So I'll be able to provide more updates after that point in time, but we're still trucking along in that process. And I think it would be a nice thing that would maybe help. You're always looking at how maybe can we, number one, make everyone healthier. That's, the number one priority, but also along with that, this would be something that would also maybe help us start having less of an increase like this on our premiums, on the health insurance side of things, and help to maybe get some of that to start trending the other direction too. So I think I missed DMG.
I think I would just add that, the possibility of an on-site clinic, I think, is huge for all of our staff, including obviously our classified staff as well. But I've been getting some feedback, particularly from elementary educators, just based on their contract time, that it's hard to get to the doctor, without having to take a full day or a half day, the previous schedule, maybe you could have just had a coverage for an hour. So having an on-site clinic, I think, would be huge for all of our staff, but I think it would really alleviate some of those concerns. Yeah.
Do you know on the analysis of like the cost of the weight loss drugs? I know that's a fairly relatively new thing, so maybe, but do you know if their analysis is taking into account possible savings elsewhere from like people maybe not incurring other health costs?
Right. We had that conversation. Excellent point, Eric. And just as you just said, the difficulty in that is because they are so new for this purpose. There's not there's not longevity in terms of studies to know. I mean, the kind of initial research that's out is showing that oftentimes people don't stay on them, and then there's the weight comes back, or there's just not enough research to show, because we had that exact we've had a lot of conversations too about kind of, I understand frustration when you're maybe a pre-diabetic and they won't prescribe them when you're pre-diabetic, and that so you're telling me I have to get sicker in order to, but they don't have a great deal of research to know. There's kind of a mixed bag of research in terms of these specific GLP-1s you look at and whether or not even the benefits outweigh some of the side effects while people are on it. So that's another piece.
We talked a little bit about, the possibility of, could we try to see if we added that coverage to one of our plans, and that's just not how it works. Like, can we do that? And then that will be really expensive, and people, but that's not how those things work. You can't put all of your really expensive people coverage for really expensive medicines in one plan. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. But I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Actuarians.
Yeah. These people that we were educating to do this job would not approve.
On the good side, there will be it doesn't look like there'll be an increase on our vision.
We'll end with that.
Yes.
Right. Well, we've got a little bit of a victory lap with all of our draft consensus items. As you all know, we have draft consensus on 2 of the items that the district brought for preschools and what's it, student?
Non-residents.
There you go. I knew it was gonna come back. So we have those. We also have 2 OE items. We'll get into the previously discussed items that we have some more minor changes to. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so kind of some reviews of our draft consensus that we moved over, additions to, the professional day document. To add in kindergarten enrollment to kind of set a standard for our early childhood educator friends. Make sure that time is equitable across the board for them. We also moved to draft consensus, some updates to the plan time language. And our kind of most recent inclusion was the but is not limited to in green and with highlighting, to make sure that all of our educators are covered and accurately represented in that plan time language, making sure we get all of our people taken care of. And we continue on, we move to draft consensus, our continuing education units, our CEUs, for our RSPs, so that they can also receive professional development training needed and necessary for their licensure. Kind of working around that with some flexibility. So those 3 are the most recent. We've moved to draft consensus. Yeah, there we go. So done. Forgot my cursor, but it was here. Yeah.
All right, so we'll move to our previously discussed proposals and some slight modifications to those. I think Medicaid is first. Yeah. Oh, no, and scheduled needs.
Yes.
My bad. Okay. Special needs.
So previously, when we brought this proposal forward, we talked about taking out the word rare because these unscheduled needs happen in our buildings more often than rarely. And then we had a discussion about what we would do, what process we would follow if it started happening frequently with one educator. And that is highlighted on the new proposal on the paper. It's in red and it's highlighted. So if we need to consistently need help during those plan times, then a meeting with an administrator would occur and a plan would be created for that. So to see if there were any additional supports that were needed.
Want to discuss as we go along or just want to like go through them?
Can't wait till how we go, because then we're.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe not a big deal, but just thoughts, because up above, in the red, it says, cause an educator to lose their negotiated plan time and duty-free lunch. And down in the bottom, it says receives a protected plan and lunch. Do we want to make that consistent, or? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that.
Maybe receives their negotiated plan and lunch.
Do you want us to bring that language back to the table or?
We change it.
I just took my phone off, sorry. I'll get it for the next one,
Okay.
no worries.
Let's get
We'll
one.
be prepared.
Excellent. So ding, ding, got another one. Okay, perfect. Next up is Medicaid. I think this is draft 4, but I think maybe we got this. So our hope on the revised language was that we could just put in the phrase, if mutually agreed to, if there was another time that would work better. I think Trisha mentioned last time, maybe the last 30 minutes or last 20 minutes or 15 or what have you, before school ends might work better so that that RSP could assist with dismissal duty. When we put that language in the sentence, it just did not work because the sentence is already long. So we tried to be as concise as we could. So the revision rather, is highlighted in yellow at the end. If the educator and administrator mutually agree, another time within the contract day may be used for Medicaid billing in lieu of after school. So the intent is just to say, if the after school time isn't the best, then that conversation would open up that possibility of another time. There we go, Scott. All right. Next up is just a little bit of clarification on the CEU reimbursement. We had tabled, really discussing whether or not we wanted to adopt this until we talked more about money. But we wanted to go ahead and get the language right, so that if it is something we decided to move forward on, we wouldn't be having the language conversations. So as you all may recall, we wanted to add this as a way to retain our educators who are not licensed through KSDE. And of course, they have some additional cost that vary based on the CEUs that are available to them. The concern last time is we didn't want to overload our system with a whole bunch of requests for CEU reimbursement. You recall this was $500 per year was the cap that we suggested. So Michelle suggested that we put some language on the reimbursement form that clarified that these CEUs would be submitted for reimbursement with their license renewal, which my understanding is that I think everybody is every 2 years, but we went ahead and did not put 2 years. We just put once per license renewal in case there is a real niche group that has a 3-year license or something, different. So the main change that you see here is the highlighted sentence. We also did take off the and or just to clarify that you are submitting both of these things together, just to kind of, put a little fine tuning on there. But otherwise, that is the only suggested change we had here. And you may recall that we had a sentence or a couple sentences on the stipend page, and I have it pictured up there. We gave it out last time, and we didn't see that there was any language in there that would need to change because it doesn't mention a timeline of turning it in. We still are looking for where that form is housed, because currently the location on that document is not a place that I can find the current version of the reimbursement form. So that might be something that we want to, that will be something regardless of whether we adopt this language, we'll want to clarify. Yeah.
That language. Basically, it's what we want to look at is during the actual renewal of the license, whenever that happens versus turning in for CEUs every year. Okay.
So we wanted to provide an official counter to the lead bank proposal. Originally we had a lot of discussion about first-year employees. Our concern about taking first-year employees completely out of that language was that obviously we really do want to focus on retention. So I was able to have some conversation with some members of the lead bank, as well as getting some additional information from Kathy Donovan. But since 2015, there have been 3 first-year employees that have accessed the leave bank. Of those, 2 resigned after their first year and no longer work for Olathe. And 1 is still an active employee and is currently paying back their days as per policy outlines. So with that additional information, that kind of assuaged some of our concerns about taking first-year employees completely out of this leave bank, although we know that currently they can't give to it or officially be part of it, but we have some exceptions. One thing that we would be excited to do, we'd like to figure out a way maybe we can partner with the district on ways that we can maybe encourage our first-year employees to consider, I mean, obviously this is their choice, but consider purchasing short-term disability insurance to kind of address the fact that should we make the changes in the leave bank proposed, that there is not any way that they can access the leave bank while that door is open a little bit currently. So ultimately, we decided not to counter with a change to that. We just have one tiny little change that we would like to suggest. On the last page of the document that was distributed in our last meeting, under F2, it had language about you must use all of your accrued leave before you apply for leave bank. And the one kind of leave, so to speak, that wasn't included in that list would be vacation. And we would like to add vacation to that because I think our intent would be that if you're applying for leave bank, you have no leave, including vacation, that you are in that really tough spot that leave bank is intended for. So that would just be our only slight change that we'd like to make.
Issue with that. Listed, right? Is that
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't want there to be a perception that, oh, now we have a very small number of people in the bargaining unit who have vacation because those are our 12-month employees generally, but we didn't want anybody to have the perception that like, oh, you can hold on to your vacation and apply for leave bank. So that was the only thing that we saw. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
As a leave expert.
Yeah.
Circle back around to it, but that'll be.
Yeah, no, perfect. Our other counter that we wanted, I guess this would be a counter to a counter, but I think we're really close, would be the leave policy and the original language we introduced to exempt FMLA, non-FMLA, and child birth adoption leave from the current policy of having to use all of your PTO first. So we believe that the district's counter does allow educators a little more flexibility in being able to save at least some PTO so that, you know, you have a surgery and you can still go to a field trip with your kid or what have you. We think that those that have taken FMLA and childbirth adoption, we think that they may have some personal needs that arise on blackout days, particularly as we look at having a lot of blackout days at the end of the school year calendar. So what our counter would be is that rather than having 3 days of PTO that can be saved up, so to speak, which was in your all's counter to ours, we're going to counter that would be 4, just because that would allow people, worst case scenario, 2 blackout days rather than 1.5, because these things will likely accumulate and want to be used more towards the end of the year. It's kind of the original issue that we were targeting.
That was the show, whichever.
Absolutely. Yeah, yep. Yeah. Yep. And I think otherwise we had a question, I believe, I can't remember if we talked about this last time or not, but we wanted to, if we did, we wanted to re-clarify. If somebody were to face a complication in their FMLA or childbirth adoption leave, you know, they thought they were going to be out 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and there's a complication, so they're out 5 or what have you. Can they change the request to retain days? Because the district counter was that when you would put in for that leave, you would say, okay, I would like to retain the 3 or the 4 or whatever PTO days. Our thought is if something went wrong, somebody may want to say, no, actually, I don't want to retain those days because the worst case happened. So that would be one of just our clarifying questions. We could see potentially being a trouble spot in the future.
Basically, in the original request, you say you want to keep the 3 days and then come back, it's worse than you thought. You change that to say.
Right. Yeah, especially if somebody's in a situation where they're being docked pay, their daily rate. I would imagine their ideas would change pretty quickly. Yeah, and I've got that question on the notes of the slides so that it's there too. All right. All right, well, we'll roll on into our proposal for today. I'm just kind of taking you back to one of our first meetings when we went over our notice letters. We had a couple of listable items related to retention. You'll notice on the right-hand side there, we had 27% of the people who, members of our bargaining unit who completed our bargaining survey, identified prioritizing safe and healthy workplaces, including supports for students with behavior in their top 3 priorities. Now, this, of course, is not an issue that is specifically SPED, but 21% of our certified licensed personnel are SPED, and we definitely see this pop a lot in the SPED world, although we know that's not just SPED. So we'd really like to kind of focus today on the item that's on the left-hand side, and that is the number, the 40% number. And here we had 2 items on our bargaining survey that I think are pretty related to one another. So that 40% amount is based on those people who completed the bargaining survey picked either one of those or both of them in their top 3 concerns in terms of retention. So today we wanted to focus on what we would like to suggest for educator autonomy. And I did print this one off since it is more than just like a word. And I'll pop it over to Eric.
This is just a couple of further quotes that we have from our survey. One said that teachers need autonomy in making decisions based on their classrooms and their students. If we're meeting the standards to be taught, then let us teach them how we see fit. And then another said that fewer students and more autonomy will decrease our stress level, feelings of failure and defeat, and therefore mental health. That will make us feel more respected as well. Now, we anticipated, we tried to explore first some possible language to bring to add to the professional agreement as it is, but there is a lot of difference in how this might look at each level. I think that the experiences and challenges at the elementary level are very, very different than they are at middle school and are very, very different than they are at high school. And so what we are proposing is a charge to go to each of those 3 level committees that exist in our current system, for the elementary, the middle, and high school committees to each wrestle with this charge. And the charge would be that the blank committee shall explore opportunities to acknowledge the professionalism of certified staff by increasing educator autonomy in day-to-day practices and curricular decisions while maintaining high-quality educational expectations for all students. And the charge would be that by February 2026, each of those committees will report back to us with possible recommendations for changes, perhaps in policy, perhaps in professional development, perhaps in language that we would want to bring change to the negotiated agreement.
Give me an example, like.
Yeah, so I went back today and looked at the comments in our survey, which is a lot to go through, and that's why we picked out a couple of those comments to highlight. But I saw, I mean, it manifests itself very differently at different levels, but one of the things that really popped to me, particularly at the elementary level, is about pacing. Being able to have the discretion to, okay, my class is having a certain, set of needs that I need in this unit to go a little bit more slowly. Or, there's a scripted aspect of the curriculum that absolutely has research behind it. And we know that those research-based practices are really important, but we're matching those up to a particular set of needs that, hey, I need to kind of modify that. And some educators feeling like a lot of pressure that if they get off the pacing guide, that, they're not doing what's right. When in fact, sometimes deviating from that is what students need. So there's a lot of comments kind of speaking to that kind of like pressure. Like I would like to feel like I have that professional autonomy to do what my kids need. Most often it went back to the needs of the students.
It's hard just from the elementary level. I mean, obviously all 36 buildings are different, but I think a lot of it is administration pressure, depending on what building you're at. I think for some buildings, there is the want to introduce like supplemental or additional activities, curriculums and things like that. To pair with wit and wisdom or to pair with 95%. And some of that's being shut down because it is not following exactly what is scripted out. So just things with good intentions that because it is not exactly what's written, that's being discouraged. And that's just obviously not at every single building, but do like middle and high school examples.
I feel like we have pretty good autonomy in middle school specifically. We pretty much, our contents align. So my 7th grade ELA colleague, we pretty much align with what we're doing, but the way I deliver that to my classroom is the way that she delivers that to her classroom. And it depends on needs. And quite frankly, it depends on the hour of the day. So just that varies on a daily basis. So I don't feel that pressure as much in the middle level.
I don't know how much of our survey we have broken down by level like that. So I don't know how much I can speak to the overall high school experience. But.
Yeah, I think most of the feedback that I got on this particular thing from the high school was related to teaching, topics that maybe are high profile in society. And some variation in how that is approached per building, which clearly every building has its own needs. But looking at how, for example, like North did this amazing professional development that was really designed by students on teaching election topics and the election itself. And it was amazing. And kind of looking at that and how that looked in different buildings, where other buildings, maybe educators didn't feel like they had as much autonomy in teaching clearly the standards, always teaching the curriculum, but figuring out what works best for their context. I think that's what I've heard mostly from the secondary. And I think there's always some tension between autonomy and fidelity. And that's one of the reasons that we didn't bring any language, because we think that the place to work out that tension would be our level committees and having conversations between administrators and educators to kind of be able to pull out what are some of the complicating factors, because this is not a simple issue, as I know you all understand.
Probably do that out
Oh, yeah.
of too, since it involves extensively already, so.
All we have for today.
Right, and actually, much for the same reason as what you just described, it has under district proposal or special topics meeting. We had noticed that up as a, like you said, a permissible item. In the interest of time and process and wanting to get things rolling for the next meeting too, we're not planning on introducing anything to that other than we would just say we may come back and look at that in the future year, just in the interest of maybe looking at some of the barriers to calling a special topics meeting for a building administrator, especially in an emergency type situation or something like that. There's obviously an extensive process to go through, so maybe finding ways in certain other circumstances to be able to call a meeting in a timely manner without having to go through all those steps. There's a couple situations that are just allowed. Obviously, if it's has to do with school improvement and those types of things, but sometimes there's some other reasons to need to pull a staff together quickly, and there's not a lot of flexibility in there for that. So that was kind of the impetus behind the us looking at it. But at this time, we don't feel like it's we want to introduce that to have any back and forth, because obviously we want to get going on some other stuff, start next meeting.
That's all we had for today's agenda. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Celebration.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
bell rang quite a few more times
Yeah.
there.
All right, well, next week, I think Monday the 28th, we will be at the Tech Center, rooms 1 and 2, same time. And I would imagine that our agenda will be quite full for that one, since we're gonna maybe delve into money. So we'll likely get to be with each other a little bit longer next week.